he found out that the process of genetic engineering caused these kind of problems. Remember, it was not the insecticide that caused the problems, because the insecticide was in these rats' diet and these rats' diet. It was only the genetically engineered potatoes that caused the problem. They both ate insecticides, and only the one that had the genetically engineered potato had these results. So somehow the process of genetic engineering was at fault. So this information is highly incriminating. So he needed to be removed from the scene. But they didn't anticipate, when they had silenced him, the biotech industry was feeling pretty confident. And in January of 1999, while he was still silenced, the biotech conference in San Francisco hosted Monsanto's consultant, Arthur Anderson. That company, was Enron's consultant also, and Subversion Makeda. So Arthur Anderson said that basically they had said to Monsanto's executives, describe your ideal future in 15 to 20 years. The executive described a world in which 100% of all the commercial seeds were genetically engineered and patented. And Anderson worked backwards from that goal and gave the strategy and tactics to achieve. They were planning to replace nature. But it didn't stop there. A friend of mine who was at the conference was absolutely dumbstruck at the level of arrogance. He had never seen this level of arrogance in his life. Couldn't even imagine. But later, a paper was circulated from another company that projected that within 5 years, 95% of all commercial seeds would be genetically engineered. They said they didn't talk about when they should, they just spoke about when they could. But 3 weeks later, the granddaughter of Dr. Arpad Pusztai was lifted by the order of Parliament and wanted him to testify. And then that was it for that ideal future. That was it for that timetable. Forget about 5 years. What happened was, within a week of his granddaughter being lifted, 159 column feet of articles were written. Within a month, 750 articles. One editor said it divided society into 2 warring blocks. So what do you think that did for the food company? What about Unilever, Britain's largest food company, like our Kraft? After 10 weeks, writing was on the wall. Get rid of GMOs or suffer loss of market share. So they publicly announced we're getting rid of all of our GMOs in Europe. What do you think happened the next day? So did Nestle. So did Kraft in Europe, so did virtually everyone. Within a week, most everyone. Within the stop the retail chains, so that's again their private brands. It was the week of lone daggers for the biotech industry. But it wasn't covered in the U.S. Project Censor described it as one of the whole Arpad Pusztai event, none of that really made a difference. Described as one of the 10 most underreported events of the year in the United States. So that's why people ask all the time, why are they so concerned about GMOs in Europe? The reason is because they know about it. You ask the average American, have you ever eaten a GMO in your life? 60% say no. 15% say I don't. But soy and corn derivatives, cottonseed oil, canola oil, sugar from sugar beets, these are the 5 main GM crops. There is roughly 9 out of 10 processed packaged foods. So most people eat GMOs every day. Now, I wrote a book called Seeds of Deception. And it actually opens with a knock on the door. Knock on the door at Ashley Park West. Arpad Pusztai's home in Aberdeen, Scotland. Susan opens the door and she sees 30 reporters either parking their cars or at the door or running to the place. What happened was they had all been at a press conference with the director of Arpad's previous boss. And he casually mentioned that the restrictions on his speaking to the president were lifted before he finished his sentence. They were headed to the door. And they all filed into Arpad's house as he was reading the gag order being lifted. And that was the moment that I started the book. So my book was about shocking moments, dramatic moments. I had to write a book that was high drama because most people in the United States don't know about GMOs. They have never heard of them. They don't think it's a big topic. It's not a big draw. So if I just said the truth about GMOs, is roughly what happened. So I wrote Seeds of Deception, exposing industry and government lies about the safety of the genetic engineered foods you're eating. And it's stories. And one of the stories that I wrote that I was planning to open the book with, but it comes around page 6 or 7, was the answer to the question that I asked most of the people I interviewed. I asked Arpad, what was the most shocking moment of the whole affair? And it wasn't discovering the damage to the rats, it wasn't being fired from his job. It was actually, a few months earlier, he was still a pro-GM scientist in good standing. Professor Philip James, who later fired him, walked into the room, put a stack of about 600 to 700 pages on our desk and said, these are the submissions from 6 or 7 biotech companies to the UK government for approval. The Minister of Agriculture is meeting in Brussels, who will vote on GMOs and wants a scientific opinion. The reason why Professor James had these confidential submissions was because he was one of the 12 members of the committee to approve these things. And so Arpad looked at him and looked at the stack and realized this man would never read these many pages, nor were the other 11 members of the committee. They were committee men. They were not working scientists. They were very busy. But he, on the other hand, had spent the previous 2 to 3 years evaluating how to test for the safety of GMOs. He was among the most competent people on earth to evaluate the stack. He said, how much time do I have? The professor said, 2.5 hours. So he said to me, Jeffrey, those 2.5 hours were very shocking to me. That was a turning point in my life. I realized what I was doing and what the food companies, what these biotech companies were doing was diametrically different. I was doing safety studies. They were doing as little as possible to get their foods on the market as quickly as possible. He said the research was bad, flimsy, superficial, poor. He called the minister and said I wasn't trying to give you a strong recommendation after 2.5 hours, but there's not enough information to allow these foods to be fed to human beings. The minister said, I don't know why you're telling me that. Those foods were approved 2 years ago. They're already on the market. So when Arpad realized later that this happened to his rats, that they had smaller brains, that they had atrophied liver, etc., damage to the system, he realized that those potatoes, if they had been submitted to the superficial, flimsy, poor, bad science, the biotech industry had used to improve the soy and corn already on the market, the potatoes would have flown through those flimsy tests. But they didn't look at this. They looked at the immune system, looked at hardly anything. But of greater concern to him was that the soy and corn on the market had been created through the same process that they used to create the potatoes. Remember, it was the process, not the insecticide, that caused the problem. So he was thinking, these slides might be the thing that the look of the future of human beings for GMOs and meat. That was his greatest concern. But today, when he got his data back, this is now published in the Lancet, but no GM food on the market has been tested to such an extent as this. Now, I'm about to give you a more technical side of GMOs. Before I do, are there any questions? Yeah.
What are the slides showing us?
Okay, this is the, you see that little white bar, looks like a barbell on the bottom or on both sides? That tells you that they're the same scale. So this is proliferative cell growth. Growth of the cells on the stomach wall. And we don't know exactly why. It is potentially precancerous for no tumor response. This was in 10 days. When you change the stomach lining and the intestinal lining, you change the way the body digests. And you see, he would have done a lot more follow-up to find out the implications and the cause of it, but he was not around.
So
They're not outlawed. They were banned by the food companies. They also have mandatory labeling. So if food companies will use GMOs, they have to say it. They have to say GMOs. But no one wants to say it because they've all told the population that they're not to use it. The population is sensitive to GMOs. The difference is animal feed. They do not require labeling of milk and meat from animals that have been fed GMOs. Several companies publicly commit not to use animal feed, but most do use GMO feed. And that's the main focus of the education effort right now. One of the main focuses in Europe is to educate people as to which companies are using genetically modified animal feed, create a consumer preference for the non-GM fed, which will cause the companies to also commit to using non-GMO animal feed.
You said cancer prevalence in the UK versus the US. Are there any research statistics about this?
I've been trying to get that research done. I've put out the word that I'm looking for help in it, and I've gotten some research done on the US side. A friend of mine's doing some research on the European side, but I haven't received it from him. One research study that was done, published in May of 2006 in the Journal of Reproductive Medicine, was looking at twinning rates, maternal twins. IGF-1, which is insulin-like growth factor 1, is much higher in the milk of cows treated with hormone growth hormone. And IGF-1 is known to increase the rate of fraternal twins. And so, according to this expert in fraternal twins, there's a much higher rate of fraternal twins in the U.S. compared to the U.K. He believes that it's because of the bovine growth hormone in the milk in the cows and the milk together. There's also more muscle milk, there's also more antibiotics in the milk, there's also more bovine growth hormone in the milk. The thing that caused it to be condemned by the American Public Health Association, the American Nurses Association, etc., was the IGF-1. This bovine growth hormone is banned in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, most of those trusts. IGF-1 is
Some of us know, I think we're aware that we get X number of body cells, 10 times more bacterium, one guy, so what is a composite self. These are body cells. What about GMO influence on the microbial components of our body?
So it's a very interesting question. When they created the flavor saver tomato, I'm going to give a story behind this because it's going to take a minute. When they created the flavor saver tomato with rats rejected, they put in an antibiotic resistant marker gene. Now I'll explain to you why they did that and what it does. To create a GM crop, let's say you want to create a corn plant that produces its own insecticide. Okay, so you take a gene from soil bacteria called BT, the Bacillus thuringiensis, and that gene inside that bacteria produces BT toxin, which kills certain insects. So they take the gene out of the soil bacteria, and they make billions of copies of it, and they put it into a gun, and they shoot that gun into a plate of billions of cells, hoping that some of the genes make it into the DNA of some of those cells. And then they have to clone those cells into plants, but they don't want to clone all the millions of them. They only want to clone those that got the gene into them. So before they multiply the cell by the gene by the millions, they put an antibiotic-resistant marker gene. Genes produce proteins. So it produces a protein that allows the cell not to die when exposed to a normally deadly antibiotic. So they put that into what they call a genetic cassette. They have the BT gene, they have an on switch that turns it on, they put the antibiotic-resistant marker gene in there, they blast them all together. Then they take this plate of cells and they put antibiotics in. And it kills all of the cells except the very few that got the genetic cassette embedded and working in the DNA. That's how they tell which of the genes